Is there any advice that you'd like to give to Koreans from like your foreign perspective?
Yes. The thing I'm preaching on lately in Korea is
You're listening to Peter's on the Block on #DailyK. Today, joined by someone who has devoted pretty much their entire adult life to sharing Korean history and culture with the world, a figure deeply respected and appreciated by Koreans and foreigners, and one of the leading scholars in Korean studies. Professor Mark Peterson is with us, and you guys loving this. It was CT saying, I love hearing about past Korea from a foreign perspective. Yeah, because I guess every perspective is unique, but certainly coming here as a foreigner in the 1960s, there weren't many who were doing that, and even fewer who were like still relaying those stories like publicly. Hearing about that hope that was in people's eyes, that really makes me feel like I was here, and I could imagine the Korean people feeling like we shouldn't be in this situation. You know, we've lived well in the past. We will live well in the future. That's amazing. And Benny saying, hearing your huge memories, looking back into it, that's really, really meaningful. Some questions then to get to. Mr. Teo saying, on your YouTube channel, The Frog Outside the Well, why did you decide to use that Korean metaphor? What does that metaphor mean again?
Yeah, that's interesting. The frog outside the well, the way I do it, is turning the frog inside the well on its ear. You know, the frog in the well is a saying that's not only used in Korea, but China and Japan.
Okay.
And Japan adds one more phrase to it. They say, what does the ocean look like to a frog in the well?
Okay, because they've never seen it. They're stuck in that small environment.
So they use the term frog in the well to criticize someone for not looking at the big picture. And you say, you're like a frog in the well, you know, take a look, you know, it's a bigger picture than that. And so I decided to be the frog outside the well, which when you think about it is really arrogant. It's like saying, I know it all and you don't. But people don't take it that way.
No.
It's really a foreigner looking at Korea. I'm the frog outside the Korean well.
And then coming and seeing that makes perfect sense, especially because Korea has that history, at least the way many people learn it, that it was very inward looking and didn't want to like communicate too much.
One of the things I've noted, I've put this on one of my YouTube broadcasts, is the standard history of Korea that is used in America is a translation of the standard history that's used here in Korea, written by Igi Beck, a great scholar. And that book has several maps, lots of maps, all of Korea. Not one of Korea in its East Asian context.
Oh, really?
Not one of Korea in a world context.
Not at all.
It's all frog in the well.
I see. So really fitting there. Great question, Leon. Thanks for that. Jun says, as someone who's translated Korean's Sijo and other literary forms, what do you believe makes traditional Korean poetry resonate with people today, both in Korea but also abroad as well?
Oh, thank you for that question. I love Sijo. Sijo is a wonderful manifestation of Korean culture. And let me tell you a brief anecdote why I like Sijo so much. I was at a conference in San Francisco. And it was almost all Korean Americans at the conference. There were 3 Caucasians there. And at the banquet that night, we're sitting at a big table. And the guy across from me was not an academic. And he didn't quite understand what academics are. And he's asking me who I am and where I was from. And I said, I teach at BYU in Utah. And he said, oh, what do you teach? And I said, Korean history and literature. Literature, you teach our literature? And I said, yeah, what do you teach? And I said, Hyanga and Kasa and Sijo and modern poetry and modern short stories. He said, Sijo. Of all the things I said, he said, Sijo. He said, you know Sijo? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, let's hear one.
Putting you on the spot.
He put me right on the spot. And I said, okay, fortunately I had one in my head. Fortunately. And I said, this is in a Korean context. We're speaking Korean. And so I said, 이 몸이 주고 일백번 고쳐 백골이 진토되어 녹시라도 있고 없고 님 향한 일편 단심이야 가실 줄이 있으랴. Halfway through the poem, I noticed that this noisy banquet hall was falling silent.
Oh, everyone listening.
Yeah. Have you been in a room where it's noisy and all of a sudden a quiet ripples through the room?
Wow.
From one point to the end of the room, and then everybody's quiet. That poem took over the room.
Wow.
And I was shocked. And I realized that by the time I finished that everybody was listening to me in this noisy hall. And then one of the other Americans said, "Oh, can you do it in English?" She didn't speak Korean.
Yeah.
And she said, "Can you do it in English?" I said, "Sure." So I said, "Though I die and die again, though I die 100 deaths, after my bones have turned to dust, whether my soul lives on or not, my red heart, forever loyal to my king, will never fade away."
Oh, wow.
The woman that asked me is an English professor.
Yeah.
And when I finished, she went, "Oh."
Oh.
She gasped.
Wow.
It was an audible gasp.
Yeah.
And
Just
in
the
English,
goosebumps.
we say that poem sucked the oxygen out of the room.
Yeah, it's so, I don't know, I in Korean I can understand a portion of it, but in English hearing it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
that
a powerful poem.
Spine-tingling.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so since that moment, Sijo has meant a lot more to me. I've realized it can control the whole room.
Wow.
And I've told my students they should learn that Sijo.
Yeah.
And I often use it when I'm making a lecture about Korean history. I can work it in.
Yeah.
Recently, I met a former student of mine who is an embassy official here at the U.S. Embassy. He said he used my poem.
Oh, wow.
In a talk to the foreign ministry officials of Korea.
It must have impressed them.
And it impressed him. And he said to me, "Thank you so much for teaching me that poem and making me swearing that I would use it at some point." So I love Sijo, and that's one of the main reasons why.
Fantastic, yeah. And you can see that if it can still give people goosebumps, then it still is relevant today, right?
Exactly,
Even though it
exactly.
could be hundreds of years old.
Exactly.
Jun also had one other question saying, you've called for a realignment of how Korean history is taught, away from a narrow focus on 20th century suffering and toward a longer, more stable narrative. So what would a more balanced history curriculum for Korea look like in your view?
Thank you for that question.
Wow.
This
Done
student
his research, yeah.
he knows my work, and
Yes.
I'm grateful to you. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I've been saying that the Korean view of history, as taught today, is distorted by the 20th century. This 20th century for Korea was awful.
Yeah.
Just plain awful. Taken over by the Japanese.
Yeah.
The thing about the Japanese takeover, there were a lot of terrible, terrible things about
Yeah.
it. You know, the comfort women issue and all of this sort of
course.
thing. But one of the things that really sticks in my craw is the idea of losing your name.
Yes.
Richard
when they did
Kim,
that,
a famous writer, wrote a New York best-selling book in the 50s called Lost Names.
about Korea.
About Korea. He was a Korean American.
Yeah.
And he wrote about being forced to take on a Japanese name. Now, can you imagine? Can you imagine being told you can't use this name, but you got to use a Japanese name? So your name's Kim, so you think, well, Kim, Japanese kane is money, Kim Kanegawa. I'll be Kanegawa.
Yeah.
I'll be Kaneshita. I'll be Kaneta. You know, something with kane in it because it's Kim.
Being forbidden from using Kim, right?
yeah.
Your family name.
You
all that
couldn't use
history.
your,
Right.
and you know, Koreans have this great chokbo, you know, family history consciousness, and to be told you can't use that name anymore.
Yeah.
Just imagine. So the point is, the 20th century was just awful,
Yeah.
and then there's liberation. World War II was awful for
Yeah.
Korea, and then the division of Korea, which was not Korea's idea,
No.
and then the Korean War on the top of that, and Korea today is still divided. So the 20th century was awful, but what happens is that history tends to emphasize the more recent. And the more recent in Korea was pihaja, the victimization.
Yeah.
Korea was a victim. But if you go beyond the 20th century, Korea had some really glorious, magnificent things.
Yeah.
The longest dynasties in the world.
Wow. Really?
Really,
Some of them are Korean.
Yeah. Shilla, Koryo, Paekje, 1,000 years, 500 years, 500 years. No other country has that kind of a tradition.
Wow, and all like back to back, right?
Yeah. And there were no failed dynasties. In other words, a startup dynasty that only went a few years,
Yeah.
like the Qin dynasty of China went 15 years. The Sui dynasty of China went 37 years.
Yeah.
Korea had no failed dynasties.
That's so true, right?
So Shilla, Koryo, and Paekje is the main line, but there were other dynasties too. There was Paekje and Goryeo
Yeah.
and Kaya. They all went 500, 600 years. So stability, I think, is the key feature of Korean history.
Yeah.
So I've been arguing that get away from the 20th century and look at the longer history, and it's magnificent. Yeah. Another example is the Amnokang. The Amnokang. I like to call it the Amnokang. I don't call it the Yalu River anymore, because people like to say the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China.
Yeah.
That has been the border for Korea for 1,000 years.
Wow.
There is no other border on the face of the earth that has lasted for 1,000 years.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you think of Europe, of course, so much of that has changed in the past few hundred years.
Every 20, 30, 40 years, the European borders change.
Yes,
There's a war, and they grab Alsace-Lorraine, or they lose Alsace-Lorraine, or whatever. But in Korea, during the Three Kingdoms period, there was internal warfare. But between the Shilla unification and the late 19th century, there were only two major events, the Mongol invasion and the Japanese invasion.
Yeah.
I argue there were only two.
Yeah.
I discount the Manchu invasions of the 1600s because they were political.
Yeah.
The Manchus came in, got the king to surrender, and they left.
Yeah.
The king went behind their back and tried to make an alliance with China. They found out about it. They came back the second time.
Yeah.
So the Manchu invasions were minor things. Not many people died. So that's my argument, that Korea has really stable, peaceful history, which is the opposite of what you learn from the 20th century.
Absolutely, and that's such a small period of time if you take it as a whole, but that recency bias, is certainly there. But I think you're doing great for championing a bigger picture. So you mentioned Brigham Young University. You've been teaching there for over 30 years.
Yeah.
And so when you teach American students, I'm guessing it's changed, but what aspects did you emphasize the most? What did they find most interesting?
Well, that's really a good question. There's sort of two facets. There are people that come to Korea looking at Korea primarily, but there are people that come to Korea from an Asian perspective. And one of the first things you teach is that Korea is unique.
Yeah.
Many Americans, I don't know what the British are like. The British are smarter than the Americans, but many Americans think of China, Korea, and Japan as the same. They all use chopsticks, they eat rice, and they all talk a funny language, so they're all the same.
Yeah.
But, when you get into it, just, immediately below the surface, Korea, China, Japan are all very, very different.
Yeah.
Linguistically, food, housing, clothing, everything. So that's one thing that you start off teaching, and then you talk about why Korea is Korea, why Koreans tick, what makes Koreans tick, and that kind of thing is what I enjoy teaching my students.
I can imagine that first part, especially these days, I think now people know what Korea is. They know it's unique and all the K culture that's being bandied about. But when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, people, if they were racist, they would just call my mum like a Chinese so-and-so. They would not know Korea at all. And I guess that first realization that these are three very distinct countries and cultures, that could be such a kind of light bulb moment for people, students, right?
Exactly.
And you've worked extensively, of course, in Korean history, literature and language. But my producer told me this, and I didn't know this about you. You corrected some errors in Britannica's career section of the Encyclopedia.
Yeah.
Wow. So what was that about? You just came across them?
Well, what happened was the Overseas Ministry put out a research grant that I was able to get to look at Britannica, other encyclopedia, and textbooks. Yeah. The Britannica thing was part of a textbook critique. And what we looked at was what's wrong with Korean textbooks. American textbooks about Korea, world history and world geography and that sort of thing. The first problem was not so much errors as lack of coverage. And I found out that the textbook writers have to fight for space.
Okay. Yeah.
And in Korea, you're in an East Asian chapter. And in East Asia, you've got to do 35 pages on China. Oh, you got to do at least 20 pages on Japan. And there's nothing left for Korea. And that happened a lot. There were some textbooks we looked at that had just one page
Wow.
on Korea.
Wow.
And we've been fighting that battle with the American textbooks for a long time.
I can imagine.
I worked on that project for 26 years.
Goodness.
And we would bring Americans to Korea
Yeah.
to do a fact-finding tour so they could be impressed with Korea
Yeah.
and want to put more
Sure.
into the textbook. But, we corrected a few things with Britannic as well as the other textbooks and such. The most prevalent error was Japanese smelling. Japanese
spellings.
smelling. I say it smelled like Japan.
Ah, really?
Yeah. For example, a textbook might talk about mimana. Do you know mimana? No. Good for you. I'm glad you don't.
Okay.
Mimana is the Japanese word for kaya.
Ah, for that kingdom.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And the Japanese have some putative claim on that territory, and they called it mimana.
Oh, really? They said it was part of their...
Yeah.
Oh, really?
They say they owned a part of Korea. And you see, that's part of the colonial occupation of Korea by the Japanese, because the Japanese said, "Oh, we had a part of you.
Yeah.
Now we need all of you."
That was the justification.
That was justification.
Goodness.
So if you hear the word mimana, I shouldn't say it. I feel like it's a swear word.
Yes.
Mimana is a kind of a swear word.
Yeah.
In that you're recognizing the Japanese claim on Korea.
Sure. And that was in textbooks, was
It
it?
was.
Oh, goodness.
It was.
Wow.
And so we criticized those kinds of things, those kinds of errors. I don't know that Britannic had that or not, but there were those kinds of things. See, very often when a textbook's written, they get an East Asian specialist.
Yeah.
Well, he might be Japanese. And then he writes the thing in what he honestly knows.
Yeah, sure.
And it comes out Japanese, as I said, Japanese smelling.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way to describe it.
일본 냄새 나요.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. On behalf of Koreans, they really have that pride, and it can be so hurtful when we see something misnamed in that way, right?
Yeah.
And then before we get into, we have a little quiz section, Professor. Before we get into that, on the flip side, as someone who's been connected to Korea for, about 6 decades now, 5 days short, is there any advice that you'd like to give to Koreans from, like, your foreign perspective?
Yes. The thing I'm preaching on lately in Korea is get married and have kids.
Oh, yes, please, please.
Yeah, because Korea is heading for self-destruction. You've seen the videos on Korea is over. That at this rate, with the lowest birth rate in the world, Korea will destroy itself. And I don't know quite how to change it, because telling someone, hey, you ought to get married and have 5 kids doesn't work very well.
No.
Koreans have been, I'm sorry to use this word, brainwashed so much by tulako chalcharara, have 2 and raise them well.
Yeah.
This is a problem in 2 regards. One is only have 2.
Yeah.
That's lowering the birth rate. And at a point in the late 70s when they started this, yes, they needed to control the population. It was growing. But now you don't need to control the population.
With all this wealth and whatnot, right?
And then chalcharara, raise them well.
Yeah.
That implies a materialism that has taken over in this country.
Yeah.
Coming over here on the freeway, on the expressway, I saw several Mercedes-Benz, several BMWs. I saw one Volvo. I saw several Teslas. I saw these expensive foreign cars on the street.
Yeah.
Tell me how Koreans cannot raise a child, but they can afford an expensive car.
Yeah.
There's a kind of hypocrisy there that it ain't right.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing. So the thing that I would like to say to Koreans is you've got to change your attitude about the competition in school that makes it so expensive to raise a child. You've got to change that attitude. You've got to have more children to save the country. That's my lesson for the day.
Yeah, I fully agree. And like 2 kids, like even that is not being done by so many people now. Just only children or no children,
no
not getting
children.
married at all, right?
Yeah.
And so you're right. There's just a nation can't exist without its people, right? In the long run.
I had a chance to teach at Ihwa the other day. And Ihwa professor was a friend of mine and said, come in and teach my class. I did. And so I was talking to these Ihwa students, these young women, 90 of them. And I talked about this. I said, you've got to get married and have children. And the professor afterwards said, you're talking to the wrong crowd.
I'm imagining it. Well-educated Korean females, young females.
One of them raised their hand and said, we've got to pursue a career. We're here to get an education.
Yeah.
So I don't know who you can talk to say
Yeah.
You need to have more
right?
children.
Yeah. Many governments have come up with policies, and it doesn't seem like any of those have worked.
Not
either.
very well. It rose a little bit this last few months.
Okay.
But almost immeasurable.
Yeah, hopefully it can pick up. So now, Professor, at the end of our segment, we have a quiz time, which is optional as well. You don't have to take the quiz, and our writer likes to make the question relatively difficult.
Oh, dear.
Into your field of expertise.
Oh, dear, yeah.
So that's why it's optional. But no one really refuses because it's just for fun, and there are prizes to be won as well. Good ones and relatively bad ones.
Yeah.
So would you like to take the quiz? No pressure either way.
No pressure. Of course I'll take the quiz.
Yes. That's why we've got the xylophone as well. Okay, so I'll give you the question, and then listeners play along as well. Tell us if you can get the answer to this. So recently, the 2025 APEC summit was held in Gyeongju, Korea, and during the event, Korea's president presented US President Donald Trump with the replica of that golden crown. I think many people found that quite amusing, and it became a huge topic of conversation. So here's the question. The golden crown given to President Trump is modeled after a real crown excavated from the Schiller-era royal tomb in Gyeongju. What is the name of that tomb?
Oh, well, there were 8 tombs.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There were 8 crowns.
Yeah.
And some people say 7 tombs because one tomb was a double tomb.
Yeah.
It was a camel-shaped, double hump tomb. So there were 2 crowns in that one tomb.
Oh.
Or you could say it was 2 tombs, or you can say it was 1 tomb. Anyway, there were 8 crowns that had been excavated.
Wow.
So it's not just one.
Yeah.
Cheonmachong. Let's say Cheonmachong as the answer because that's the best known. That's the flying horse tomb. But there were a total of 8 altogether.
Amazing. We do have options to give as well, but you did not need them, Professor. Unbelievable. Cheonmachong, yes, the flying or winged horse. It was the replica of that crown. 8 crowns from the tombs.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That is the most famous for Koreans as well, though, that gold one that was
the
presented.
first gold crowns in the world came out of Korea.
Really?
Because Korea has gold.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. In fact, some of the first foreigners to come into Korea were gold miners.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Back in the day? And I know during the Japanese occupation, there was like mining of gold and like taking it over to
The Korean
Japan.
mountains are full of all sorts of minerals and things that are really wonderful. Yeah.
CT says, I remember nearly 20 years ago, there were hardly any foreign cars on the road. Yeah, and I've got to say, in this section of Seoul, Sijo, you will see so many luxury brands. So I do agree with the professor. Put that money into raising kids and we'll be on a better track. And Jason, one last question for you, says, what do you think about Koreans marrying non-Koreans and raising kids here? Because when I was young in the 80s, not many of us here. These days, so many more multicultural families.
Yeah. No, in the old days, it was not looked favorable.
Yeah.
Today, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
You need it.
Absolutely. To sustain that population at least, and then like have a more multicultural view. I'm fully on board with Professor Peterson as well. Thank you so much. And everyone remember the frog outside the well for more content. If you want to interact with Professor Peterson there, write up your comments, subscribe, like, etc.
Yeah, send me a comment. Say you saw me on the radio.
Yes, please do so. Go and do that right now. We wish you the best of luck with the rest of your trip here, although you're going back tomorrow. So when you're back in as well, good luck with all your upcoming events in Korea and in America as well, Professor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.